Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Aleph, Daf 31 of Masechta Yoma. Daf Lamed Aleph, at the beginning, for the first part, we kind of continue our discussion about the Kohanim going to the mikveh before starting the service in the temple, even if they are already tahor. And then we discuss sort of the next step that the Kohen Gadol takes on Yom Kippur, which is interesting, particularly focusing on Kidush yadayim v'raglayim, washing his hands and feet from the kiyor. So that is what is on the agenda for today. We are going to begin on Daf Lamed Aleph, on Daf Lamed Omid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Amar le'abai Rav Yosef, Tvila zo chotzetz or enu chotzetz. So this Tvila, right, when the Kohen, if you have a Kohen, even if he's tahor, still he goes to the mikveh before beginning the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. So, like, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the point of this going to the mikveh is just it's not a chiyuv per se, as much as a reminder that by going to the mikveh, he's making sure that he's actually pure. And if he remembers, oh shoot, lemaise, I'm impure, so then he won't do the avodah that day. He'll be a tful yom and he'll have harav shemesh at night. But at least it'll serve as a good reminder that he shouldn't be doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So if that's the case, that according to Rabbi Yehuda at least, it's specifically a reminder, and that's the purpose of it. So to what extent do we have to be makpid on the halachis of going to the mikveh? It could be possibly, arguably, just as good of a reminder, even if I have a chatzitza, even if there's a separation between my body and the water. Now, in general, you're not allowed to have a chatzitza when you go to the mikveh, but arguably, if over here the whole point of going to the mikveh is just as a reminder, so maybe chatzitza isn't that big of a deal. So Amarle, so Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, Chol Takun Rabbanon Kein Doraisa Takun, that of course, any takana de Rabbanon, anything that the rabbis established, it has the say, we treat it as if it were the oraisa. Meaning, if the rabbi said, go to the mikveh, so we want to treat going to the mikveh the same way we would treat it if it was going to the mikveh the oraisa, and therefore, yes, chatzitza is going to be important. If you have to go to the mikveh with all the halachas of mikveh, including chatzitza, right, i.e. that there should be no chatzitzas, because called the takun rabbanon, kein doraisa takun. Omer le'abai Rav Yosef, bia b'miktzas shmabia olo. What if you go into the Azara shtickle, right? Meaning, so we say, in order to go into the Azara, go to the mikveh first. What if you don't exactly want to go entirely into the Azara? What if you just want to stick your finger in? Can you stick your finger in if you haven't gone to the mikveh yet? So, Omerle, so Yosef responds to Abai, Bahonas yochichu, the thumbs and toes of the mitzora will give you your answer. Shein bia b'miktzas v'tanya mitzora tova v'omid b'shar nikanor. That the mitzora, what happens, as we learned yesterday, the mitzora on day 8 of his purification process goes to the Beis HaMikdash, and he goes to Shar Nikanor, and he sticks in his thumbs and his big toe, and they put some blood on it. And it says that before doing that, he goes to the mikveh. So we see, even though he's just sticking in his fingers and toes, he would still have to go to the mikveh. So we see that bia b'miktzas, going into the azara, even just part of your body, is enough to warrant going to the mikveh. Ibailu, they ask the kasha. You hear that? Can you stand outside of the azara with a long knife and slaughter an animal that's in the azara? What do you guys think? On the one hand, he's not in the Hazara. On the other hand, the animal is. What do you guys think? Tubai levenzoma, tibai l'rabbanon. Now it's a kasha for Benzoma, who says that this going to the mikveh before going into the Hazara is a mitzvah saseh. And it's also a kasha according to the Rabbanon, who say that, just as we saw yesterday, that just shar kol adam, regular people, if they're tahor, they don't necessarily have to go to the mikveh another time before going into the Azara. So Tibai levenzoma, Tibai l'Rabbanon, depligi ala de Rabbi Yehuda. Tibai levenzoma, so you can ask the kasha on Benzoma, ad kan lo mechayev Benzoma el gavoy, when Ben Zoma says, that there's a mitzvah saseh, that a Kohen needs to go to the mikvah before going into the Azar, so that's because he's going into the Azar. But here he's not going into the Azar, he's outside the Azar. But he might end up, he's starting outside of the Azar, sure, but he might end up, what does the name Shuche mean? To be drawn in to the Azar somehow. And therefore, we nonetheless want to make sure that he goes to the mikveh first, just in case he ends up being drawn into the Azar. You can also ask the kasha and the rabbis who argue in Rabbi Yehuda and say that Shar Kol Adam, other people other than a Metzora, would not have to go to the mikveh to go into the Azara, I assume, if they are tahor. Ad kan luka amir rabbanon hasam to luka avid avoda. The reason why they say that Shar Kol Adam, that other people do not have to go to the mikveh first, is because they're not doing an avoda. They're not doing a service in the temple. The Kohanim are doing the service, but other people, they're not doing a service. So maybe if they're pure, they don't have to go to the mikveh first. But over here, where this person might not be in the Azara, but they're doing an avoda, maybe that wouldn't apply, and they would have to go to the mikveh even though they're outside the Azara, because they're doing an avoda. Maybe it makes no difference. And the fact of the matter is, they're outside of the Azara. Maybe it's okay. Take it. The Gemara says we don't know. Weiter. So we say that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, so he goes to the mikveh 5 times and he does Kidush yadayim v'raglayim 10 times. We can see this in a little bit more detail on Lamed Aleph and Beis, and I think in the coming days a little bit more. But basically, there would be 5 avodas that the Kohen Gadol would do on Yom Kippur, and between each one, he would change his clothing. And each time he changed his clothing, he would go to the mikveh once and do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim twice. Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is that he would wash his hands and his feet. So now, before going to the mikveh, he would do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and after going to the mikveh, he would do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And therefore, he goes to the mikveh 5 times and does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim 10 times. Okay, that's enough for now. Tanu Rabbanim. So the rabbis taught that on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh 5 times and does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim 10 times. Fine. And all of them, we've seen this before. I think certainly at least once, maybe even twice. And all of the times he goes to the mikveh, it is inside, right? It's in the holy. It's in the Bakodesh. And it's on top of the Beis HaParveh, Chutz Mirishona, with the exception being the first time he goes to the mikveh, Sha'isa B'chol, that it was in a not holy part of the Beis HaMikdash, Agabi Sha'ar Mayim, on top of the gate of the water, and it was next to his office. Fine. Very good. Amar Abai says, Abai Shmamino, in Eitam Gavoa Mikar Kazor, Esem V'Shalosh Amos. Okay, fine. Abai says, so we can learn from here, from the fact that the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh on top of the Beis HaParveh, or no, is it Beis HaParveh or Shara Mayim? The fact that he's going to the mikveh on top of Shara Mayim, the water gate. So that must mean that Ein Eitam, which is the spring from which, right, the spring that supplies the water for the Shara Mayim, so it must be higher than the ground 23 amas, because it must be that the mikveh that was on top of the Sha'ar Mayim had a height of 23 amas. The Tananis we learn in the Mishnah called Psachim Shayusham Govan Asar Amma V'Rochban Eser Amas, that all of the gates of the Beis Hamikdash were 20 amas tall and 10 amas wide. Chutz Mishal Ulam, the exception being the Ulam, which was sort of the entryway into the Heichel, that was twice as large. It was 40 amas tall and 20 amas wide. Vitanya, we learn in the Brisa, V'rachatz b'sor b'amayim. It's the Brisa that we saw at the beginning of Masechta Eruvin and Daf Daled Amud Beis. That one pasuk says, V'rachatz b'sor b'amayim, that he will wash his flesh in water. B'mei mikvah, that must mean that it has to be gathered waters. Mei mikvah, kol b'saro. And then the next pasuk, is it the next pasuk or a few psukim later, says, Kol Basaro, all of his flesh, Ma'im Shkol Gufa Olabayin, which means that there has to be enough water that his entire body can get into it. So how much water is that? That it's enough water that your entire body can get in? It's 40 sa of water, and to get 40 sa of water in a container, that container would be 1 amma long by 1 amma wide with a height of 3 ammas. So what do we see? So we see that Shar Amayim was 20 ammas tall, right? We see all the gates in the Beis HaMikdash were 20 ammas tall except for the ulam. So it's 20 ammas tall, plus there was a mikvah on top. And that mikvah, we said in order for it to have 40 sa, it has to be 1 amma by 1 amma at a height of 3 ammas. So it must be that the height of the top of the mikvah was 23 ammas off the ground, and if the water, and therefore the stream supplying the water for this mikvah must have been 23 ammas off the ground. But 1 second. That mikvah wasn't suspended in the middle of the air. It must have been on top of the, what's that word? The lintel? Is that when you have like an entryway, so there's the 2 side posts and then the one that lies on top of it. Is that called the lintel or something? Anyways, that thing, that cross beam also has a thickness. So Kilu, if the space of the gate is 20 ammas tall, but then there must be some kind of beam lying on top of it as like a roof for it. So that must have had a certain thickness, which is being added to the 20 ammas of gate and the 3 ammas of the height of the mikvah. There's also going to be the height of the crossbeam above the gate. Now, also the floor of the, the mikvah, Kilu, imagine like a bathtub or of sorts, Kilu, the floor of it is also going to have a certain thickness. So that's also going to be added to the 23 ammas of the gate in the mikvah. So shouldn't it be even taller than 23 ammas? So again, va'ika amma tikra, but what about the amma of the ceiling of like the roof of the gate? You have to add another amma for the thickness of the floor of the mikvah. So the Gemara says, well, actually, the gates of the Beis HaMikdash, since they are made out of marble and they're very strong, they really don't need to be very thick. Mashu. Okay, fine, but what about also the? And what about sort of the floor of the mikvah? Since it wasn't an amma, so it's not important. Kilu, fractions is not so important. I mean, when we say that ein eita must have been 23 ammas above the ground, sure, maybe 23 and a little bit, but it's not, if it's less than an amma, it's not something that we're gonna be makbid on to factor in. Parsu sadin shel butz v'chulei, and then it says that they hung a sheet of cotton between the Kohen Gadol and everybody else. Ma'ishna shabutz, how come cotton? Kedom Rav Kahana, as Rav Kahana says, K'dei sheyakir shavodas hayom b'beged butz ochanami sheyakir shavodas hayom b'beged butz. So just like Rav Kahana said in a different context, so that he will recognize, and it'll be like a reminder, and it'll be clear to him that all the avoda that's happening today in the Beis HaMikdash is with cotton. So here also the point of the cotton curtain is so that as a reminder for the Kohen Gadol that today's services, at least in the Kodesh HaKodashim, are going to be with cotton garments, as opposed to the 8 garments that involve gold that he is accustomed to. New Mishnah, Pashat Yorad V'Toval. So then, when the Kohen Gadol gets started in the Beis HaMikdash and Yom Kippur, so the first thing he does is Pashat, he takes off his weekday clothing. Yarad V'Tavel, he goes to the mikvah. Olav and Estapik, he then dries himself off with a towel. Hevir lo bigdei zav, they bring him his golden garments. V'lavash, and he puts on those garments, the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol. V'Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav, and here we see he's doing Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Hevir lo es hatamid, they then bring him the korban tamid shel shachar on the morning of Yom Kippur. Kartzo, he shechts it, and as we've seen the other day, he shechts it just enough to be yotze the mitzvah of shchita, and then at that point, umerek acher shchita al yado, and then a different kohen completes the shchita. Kilu, the kohen does a baseline, the kohen gadol does like a baseline kosher shchita, and then the kohen that's next to him finishes it up. Why? Because Kibbalas Adam, because the Kohen Gadol then has to do the Kabbalas Adam. All of the Avoda in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur must be done by the Kohen Gadol, and he's got a lot to do, he's running around, and therefore, in order to be able to do the Shechita, and also then do the Kabbalas Adam, receive all the blood from the neck of the animal into the Kli, so he's got to move quickly, and therefore he just shechts the animal enough to be Yotze, and then he lets a different Kohen complete the Shechita while he runs to get while he organizes the vessel to receive the blood. Vizarko, and then he throws that on the Mizbeach, the blood on the Mizbeach. Nichnas la'ketir ketores, he then moves on to go inside to the Heichal to offer the ketores, the incense, shel shachar of the morning, uleite v'saneros, and to clean out the menorah from the night before, ulakar v'sarosh v'saivarim, and to put then he puts the head and the limbs on the Mizbeach, Vesa chavitin, and the minchas chavitin that the Kohen Gadol would offer every day. Vesa yayin, and the wine libations. K'torah shel shachar esokrev ben dam leivarim. The incense of the morning was offered between the throwing of the blood on the mizbeach and the limbs. I guess putting the limbs on the kevesh. Shobin arabayim of the afternoon k'torahs ben evarim was between putting the limbs, I guess, of the afternoon offering on the mizbeach and the nesachim. And the libations, Rashi says the Gemara is going to give us more information about this. If the Kohen Gadol was old, or if he was very, very particular, he was an istanis, so they can heat up water already from before Yom Kippur, and put them into the cold waters of the mikvah in order to temper them a bit so that it's more comfortable for the Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara, Rabbanon Kamidu Apapa. So the rabbi said before Apapa, there's a very simple Rashi, but I feel like it's very interesting. Says Rashi, Rabbanon Tamidei de Apapa Amukach Lefanav. When it says Amura Rabbanon Kamidu Apapa, it means his students. His students said, Rapapa's students said to him. So the Rabbanon in this context are, so Amura Rabbanon Kamidu Apapa, Rapapa's students, the rabbis in the yeshiva where Rapapa was the Rosh Yeshiva, they said to him, Hadlok Reb Meir. This Mishnah must not be like Reb Meir. Because what does Mishnah say? It says he takes off his weekday clothing. It doesn't say anything about Kidush yadayim v'raglayim. He goes directly to the mikvah. He then puts on his shmona begadim of the big day of the Kohen Gadol, and then he does Kidush yadayim v'raglayim for the first time. What happened to the Kidush yadayim v'raglayim when he took off his weekday clothing? Remember, every time he goes to the mikvah, every time he changes his clothes, he goes to the mikvah. And each time he does a Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before going to the mikvah and after going to the mikvah. But this time, we're seeing that he's only going to the mikvah, he's not doing Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before going to the mikvah. It says he takes off his weekday clothing, immediately goes to the mikvah, and then puts on the big day Kohen Gadol, and then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for the first time. So Amur Rabbanon Kamidu Rapapa, so Rapapa's students said to him, Hadlok Reb Meir, that this must not be like Reb Meir, the Reb Meir, because if it was Reb Meir, came into Omar, since he said, Tre Kiddushe Alavisha, that both of the Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that he's doing is for the clothing that he's about to put on, Avidu, Hachanami la'avid Tre Kiddushe Alavisha, so here also he should have to do 2 Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim on the clothing that he's about to put on. So there's going to be a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir regarding the second Tevila, regarding the second time he goes to the mikvah. And what the machlokas there is, okay, so sort of the next time he's going to be going to the mikvah, so there's going to be Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before going to the mikvah. He then goes to the mikvah, and then he puts on his next set of clothing, and then after he puts on his next set of clothing, he does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim a second time. Now, the question is, when he does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim the first time before going to the mikvah, does he do that while he's still wearing the previous set of clothing? So meaning he does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim and then removes the previous set of clothing, and then goes to the mikvah, and then puts on the next set of clothing, and then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim a second time? Or does he first remove the previous set of clothing, or let's call it the first set and the second set, or does he first remove the first set of clothing, and then do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then go to the mikvah, and then put on the second set of clothing, and then do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim a second time. Meaning, the question being, the first Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, does it happen before he takes off his first set of clothing, or after he takes off his first set of clothing? Now, according to the Chachamim, he first does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then he removes his first set of clothing. According to Reb Meir, he first removes the first set of clothing, and then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. The students of Reb Papa want to argue and want to understand that what this means is that according to Reb Meir, that he first removes his first set of clothing, and only then does he do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then go to the mikvah, and then put on the second set of clothing, and then do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Everyone agrees that the second Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is after he puts on his clothing. Reb Meir wants to argue that both Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that he's doing is in preparation for putting on the second set of clothing. He first removes the first set of clothing, only then does he do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and then goes to the mikvah, and then puts on the second set of clothing, and then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim a second time. Both of those Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim are towards the second set of clothing that he's putting on. Whereas the rabbis say, first he does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim while still wearing the previous set of clothing, the first set of clothing. He then removes the first set of clothing, then goes to the mikvah, then puts on the second set of clothing, then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim a second time. According to them, the first Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is for the first set of clothing that he's wearing. The second Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is for the second set of clothing that he's putting on. How does this apply to our case? Well, in this case, the Kohen Gadol is showing up in the Beis HaMikdash at the beginning of the day. He's wearing his weekday clothing. Nothing holy about them. So, according to the rabbis, you wouldn't do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before removing your weekday clothing. Who cares? They're not holy. There's nothing special about them. There's no Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Only once you put on the second set of clothing, which is now holy clothing, would he do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. However, the rabbis are asking, and they're saying to Rav Papa, hey Rav Papa, if you're Rebbe Meir, and you say that both Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim are in preparation for the second set of clothing that you're putting on, well then, even for the first mikvah of the day, he should be doing two Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim because they're both in preparation for the holy clothing that he's about to put on. So he should take off his weekday clothing, do a Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, then go to the mikvah, then put on the second set of clothing, which is holy clothing, and then do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim another time. So from the fact that the Mishnah is saying that he simply takes off his weekday clothing, goes to the mikvah without Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, puts on the next set of clothing, which is holy, and then does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for the first time, it must mean that it's not like Reb Meir, because Reb Meir would say that both Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim are in preparation of the clothing that he's about to put on, which is holy clothing, so you would still have to do two Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Everybody got that? Good, let's go weiter. So Amur Rabbanan Kamid Rav Papa. So the rabbis say before Rav Papa, Adulok Reb Meir, that this Mishnah must not be like Reb Meir. The Reb Meir, because if it is Reb Meir, since Reb Meir's opinion is that both Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim are in preparation for the clothing that he's about to put on, so here also, why should this be any different? He's about to put on holy clothing, he should do two Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, yet our Mishnah skips the Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that is prior to going to the mikvah. Amru Rav Papa ben Rabbanan ben Reb Meir. Says Rav Papa, no. Both according to the rabbis and according to Reb Meir, Chad apshita de bidei kodesh v'chad alavisha. Even Reb Meir agrees that first Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, i.e. when he takes off his clothing in general, when he's going from one holy clothing to another holy clothing, and the first Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that he does when he takes off the first set of clothing, that's also connected to the first set of clothing, not to the second set of clothing. We wanted to argue a second ago that according to Reb Meir, both Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim are in preparation for the second set of clothing. Says Rav Papa, no. According to Reb Meir also, even though he says that he does the first Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim after taking off the first set of clothing, nonetheless, it's still connected to the first set of clothing. And here, right, the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Reb Meir is simply a machlokas in how to understand psukim. that the pasuk says ufashat v'rachatz v'lavash. It says ufashat and v'lavash, and in between there is v'rachatz, which we connect to both of them. But basically, both Rab Meir and the Chachamim are comparing pshita to levisha, removing the clothing to putting on the next pair of clothing. Rab Meir says makish pshita to levisha. Rab Meir says that we compare the taking off of the first set of clothing to the putting on of the second set of clothing. Just like when he puts on the second set of clothing, everybody agrees that he first puts on the second set and then does Kidush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So af pshita poshet v'chakach mekadesh. So also when it comes to removing the clothing, first he removes the clothing and only afterwards he does the Kidush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Rabbanan Savre was the rabbis told Makish Pshita Levisha that you compare Pshita Levisha Ma Levisha Kshu Lavush Mikadesh, just like when he puts on the new clothing, he's doing Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim once he's wearing the clothing, when he's wearing clothing. Pshita Kishu Lavush Mikadesh. So also when he removes the first set of clothing, also when does he do the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? When he's wearing the clothing. So before he removes them. So therefore, Rav Papa wants to argue that no, your understanding of Meir is wrong. Both according to the rabbis and according to Rav Meir, the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for the first set of clothing is connected to the first set of clothing, and the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for the second set of clothing is connected to the second set of clothing. And the only reason why Rav Meir says that you do the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim after removing the first set of clothing is not because that Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is connected to the second set of clothing. No, it's just because of Gzeres HaKos, how he learns the pasuk. That the pasuk says Ufashat v'lavash, that just like by the Levisha, first Levisha and then Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, so also by the Pshita, first Pshita and then Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, first he removes the first set of clothing and then he does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, but it's still connected to the first set of clothing, and therefore you can say that our Mishnah is even Reb Meir, because our Mishnah says that the first time he goes to the mikvah of the day, when he's taking off his weekday clothing, he doesn't do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Reb Meir would agree. Why should he do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? It's just weekday clothing. Amrulei, the students then responded to Rav Papa. Amrulei Rabbanan Rav Papa, Umimatzis Amatachi, can you really say such a thing? We have a brayso that's explicit. The Atani, we learn in a brayso of Persu, Sudden Shabudz Beinu Levinu Ob, that they spread out, that they hung a sheet of cotton between the Kohen Gadol and the nation. Pashat v'yarad v'taval. He then took off his weekday clothing, went to the mikvah, no Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, Olav v'nistapig, he came out of the mikvah, dried himself off. Hevilo big day zav, they gave him the shmona begadim of the Kohen Gadol, v'lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav, he then put them on, and then he did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for the first time. Reb Meir Omer, says Reb Meir explicitly, Pashat v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. No, what happened was, he first took off his weekday clothing, his regular clothing, and then he did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, v'yard v'tavli, went to the mikvah, olav v'nistapig, he then dried himself off, hevilo big day zav. Then they brought him the shmona begadim of the Kohen Gadol, v'lavash, and he put them on, v'kidesh yadav v'raglav, and did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim a second time. So we see that according to Reb Meir, even for the first time, when he removes his non-holy clothing, he would still do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, because both Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, the one when he takes off his first set of clothing and when he puts on his second set of clothing, they're both in preparation for the second set of clothing, and therefore even the first one of the day, when he's wearing his weekday clothing, it doesn't matter, because the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim that he's doing when he takes off his regular clothing is still in preparation for the holy clothing that he's about to put on anyways. So we see that it's pretty clear that Reb Meir would say, like the students of Rav Papa are arguing, that even for the first mikvah of the day, he would do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim beforehand. Amar Luhu, Rav Papa responds, Itanya Tanya, says, look, if that's what the brayso says, that's what the brayso says, can't argue on a brayso. Very cool. Now the Gemara asks Akash, they say, one second, I kind of understand Reb Meir, because Reb Meir says that even the first time that he takes off his non-holy clothing, right, meaning when he takes off his non-holy clothing, when he goes to mikvah for the first time, he does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim beforehand, that's how you get 10, right? We said, he goes to the mikvah 5 times, does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim 10 times. So I understand according to Reb Meir, because all 5 times he goes to the mikvah, he does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim beforehand, and the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim afterwards. So that's how you have 5 tefillos, and 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But according to the rabbis, they skip the first one, so then aren't there only 9? It's only 9 Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim because the first time he goes to the mikvah, he's not doing Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim beforehand because it's weekday clothing. Amilach Rabbanan, the rabbis will say to you, Kidush Basra, Ki Pashit Bigdei Kodesh, V'lavish Bigdei Chol, Avidlei Hasam. The rabbis respond and say, well, yes, he skips the Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim the first time around. Kilu, when he takes off his weekday clothing and goes to the mikvah for the first time, he doesn't do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, sure. But at the very end of the day, when he takes off the Bigdei Kodesh and puts back on his Bigdei Chol, his non-holy clothing, well, since the Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is going to be connected to the Bigdei Kodesh that he's taking off, well, then you'll do your 10th one then. Whereas Rav Meir would say that you wouldn't do a 10th one because Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is always in preparation for the one that you're about to put on, and what he's about to put on is weekday clothing. And therefore, while Rav Meir has, might have an extra one at the beginning, as an extra one at the beginning, the rabbis have an extra one at the end. Alright, very nice. Well, that was Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Yoma. It was pretty cool, right? At the end there it got a little stark. But, I think it was a cool daf. So, the first part of the daf, we continued the discussion about the Kohanim having to go to the mikvah before doing the avoda in the Azara. We discussed, Abaye asks, he says, if this is only, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where this is only just as a reminder, so, how makbid do we have to be? What if there's a chatzitza? So we say, called the takun rabbanon kein d'oraisa takun. Look, if the rabbis made a gezerah, it is the same. We have to treat it as if it was a gezerah d'oraisa, and therefore all the chumras would apply, and yes, you gotta be makbid on chatzitzas. Okay, then we discussed a little bit of stuff around that, and then we got to a new Mishnah regarding the Kidush yadayim v'raglayim, the Beis Hamikdash, and we saw an interesting of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. There was an interesting machlokas that we saw between Reb Meir and the Rabbanan. Ultimately, we're understanding the machlokas to be that according to the rabbis, so basically the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he went to the mikvah 5 times, and he would do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim 10 times, and that would coincide with switching his clothing between different avodas. So according to the rabbis, each time he switches his clothing, he does Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for the clothing, for the holy clothing that he's taking off, as well as another Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for the holy clothing that he's putting on. And then he goes to the mikvah in between. Which means that the first time he's going to the mikvah, when he's changing out of his non-holy clothing, well then you're not going to do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for that. So the first time around, you're really only doing Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim after going to the mikvah. They then make up for the one that we skipped at the very end of the day. They make up for it by saying that when he takes off his final his final round of holy clothing, he would go to the mikvah again. Whereas Reb Meir understands it as, no, the Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim that he does before going to the mikvah and after going to the mikvah are both in preparation for the clothing that he's about to put on. In which case, even the first time he goes to the mikvah for the day, he's going to do Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim twice in preparation for the clothing that he's about to put on. However, at the end of the day, after he's done with all the avoda, he wouldn't be doing a Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim when he takes off the holy clothing for the last time because it's not in preparation for anything special. Cool. Okay, so the nafkamina between Reb Meir and the Rabbanan really being, I guess as I just said, right, on the first mikvah of the day, as well as when he changes out of his clothing, his holy clothing at the end of the day. That was Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Yoma. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.